Now we're on Daf Tes Amud Beis. We have now 3 psukim that teach us that Mosar Pesach is brought shlom. Why do we need 3 psukim? So Gemara says Chad le'ibros manav ve'ibros naso. Number 1, I have a case of a carbon pesach that has 2 strikes against it. 2 strikes. Number 1, it's older than 1 year. The keves is in its 2nd year. And number 2, ibras mano. It's already a year since you were magdish the carbon. Or lavdafka a year, but it's certainly during the year. Chad, I need a second pasuk, ibras mano veloshna. So it's past Yudalid B'Nisan, but it's still within the 1st year of its life. And Chad, I need a third pasuk, lo ibros mano veloshnasa. In other words, it's before Yudalid B'Nisan. So it's still less than a year old, and it's before the Pesach. And I need a pasuk to teach me that if he shechts the Korban Pesach prematurely before Yudal B'Nisan, it becomes a Korban Shlomim. Utrichi, and I need all 3 psukim. Te'ikas Rachman Echad Havamina. If we only had 1 pasuk, I would assume that pasuk is referring to the Ibrosh Nasu Uzmano, which means it has 2 strikes against it. Meaning it's more than a year old. It's called Ibrosh Nasu. And it's Zmano, meaning we're after Yudal B'Nisan. The Idchemi Pesach Legamre. It has 2 strikes against it, and therefore it's rejected from Pesach, and therefore it's brought as a Shlomim. But even if it passed Yudal B'Nisan, but it's still within its 1st year, the Chazil Pesach Sheni, if it's between Yudal B'Nisan and Yudal B'Iyar, you could bring it as a Pesach Sheni because it's still less than a year old. Although I would think it doesn't lose its status as a Pesach. Because Rachmanani Tartin, if I had the other 2, I would have said Mishum De'ilchi Lehumim Sayu. They are rejected from their original position as a Korban Pesach, namely, to be brought on Yudal B'Nisan. But what about a case where it's a week before Pesach and the animal is less than a year old, the Chazil Pesach? It really should be waited. We should really wait and bring it as a Korban Pesach on Yudalid. Although I would think that now, if he shechts prematurely, it's not redirected as a Shlomim. Tzrich, I need all 3 psukim. Rav Mishmei de Mavog. Strange name, Mavog. But this statement of Rav in the name of some Chacham by the name of Mavog is going to be constantly examined and investigated. What does Rav say in the name of Magog? Chatos sheshchoto l'shum chatos nachshon kshera. Right, at the time of the Chanukas HaMishkan, every Shevet, his Nasi would bring a Korban Chatos. For example, the first of all the Shvatim to bring his Korban was Nachshon from Shevet Yehud. Then he would bring a Chatos. And now, let's say it's at the time of the Mikdash, an individual brings a Chatos for the purpose of Chatos Nachshon. And since it's from one Chatos to another Chatos, it's not a complete Shinu Kodesh, therefore the carbon is kosher. The Omar Kro, the Torah says, Zos Torah Chatos, Torah Achas Chol Chatos. So all Chatos are put in the same bed. Now, this, I believe, is problematic because we had Rava himself on Daf Zion just 2 blot ago. Yeah, it's not really a problem. Now that I think about it, Rava, when he spoke about bringing a chatas for another person's chatas, that's different. Here, apparently, he's not really bringing it for not, for Nachshon. And Rava, as a matter of fact, said on Daf Zayin that a chatas that's brought for a different chatas, like for example from chaylev to dam, is kosher, and that fits under the principle of Torah achas l'chol chatos. Yosef Rava Kamalei Lashmaita, and when Rava was transmitting this Torah of Rav in the name of Mavod, Esvei Rav Misharshia raised the following objection. Rabbi Shimon Omer, we have a brisa quoting Rabbi Shimon, that kol hamenochos shenikmitzu shelo lishmon ksheros, that even though in Zevachim shelo lishma might be a problem, like for example in Chatos or in Pesach, but when it comes to the Kmitza, which is the main avoda of Menachos, if that avoda was done shelo lishman, now here I believe shelo lishman is a reference to 2 types of menachos, as we'll soon see. He says it's shelo lishma. Now, a regular korban, not a mincha, that's brought shelo lishma, is eino ola lebailam l'shem chova, and the bailam have to bring a second replacement korban. But here, in the case of a mincha shelo lishma, ola lebailam l'shem chova. L'fi she'eina menachos domos l'zvachim. Now comes along the Tana Rab Shimon, and he explains why is it that in the case of a mincha, shelo lishma doesn't passel the korban. Now, in order to appreciate this brisa that it's quoted by Rav Misharshia, we have to know a little bit about menachos, which is an entire masechta, as you know. So we can't learn the whole masechta al regel achas. But basically, there are 2 types of menachos. One is called marcheshes, and the other is called machvas. Now, what's the difference between a machvas? A machvas is fried meaning the loaves, flour, on a flat griddle. And because there's a lot of physics here, because the griddle is shallow, the oil spreads, burns off, resulting in hard loaves. So that's called a machvas. Then we have another mincha, which is called a marcheshes. And that's fried in a deep pan. The fire does not burn off the oil. The loaves are soft and spongy. When a person places his finger on a marcheshes, it quivers. The loaf quivers, giving the impression that it is creeping, and that's why it gets the name marcheshes. Now, just a word or two about kmitza, which is literally translated as scooping, which is the first of 4 avodos of a mincha. The Kohen bends the middle finger. The Kohen bends the middle 3 fingers of his right hand over his palm and he forms a hollow. So there's a little bit of a hollow here. And flour that fills this hollow is removed from the mincha by the Kohen, forms a kometz that's burnt on the mizbeach. So kometz machvas l'shem marcheshes, and I have to assume it goes the other way around, is kosher. Now, why is it kosher? Says Reb Shimon, and for this we have to pay attention, Maseh mochichnov shimachvas. Even if the Kohen announces that he's bringing this as a marcheshes, but he brought it in a flat pan, a griddle, and that is Maseh mochichnov shimachvas. In other words, the way that the Kohen does the scooping, the kmitza, is going to prove to everyone, and it becomes obvious to the spectator, that it is a machvas and not a marcheshes. Karevel l'shem blula. Okay, you have a mincha that's dry, you have a mincha that is mixed with oil and is liquidy. Most minachos contain oil mixed with flowers. However, there's a mincha that's brought as a chatos that doesn't contain any shemen at all. And that's based on a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Hey. It says, Lo yosim oleh shemen. Again, that's a minchas that is brought as a chatos. And once again, even though he brought it l'shem blula, but maseh mochichet shi chareva. All the avodas are identical for every single type of zeva. So it's not obvious to the spectator that, he had in mind the right carbon. How would you know? If he declares that he had in mind the wrong carbon, like Olo L'Shem Shlomim, then that's what he declared. But in the case of Menachos, even though he declared it was L'Shem Marcheshes, but L'Maisa Maseh Mochinov, it was Machmas. Okay, so now we have this brisa, which was quoted by Marashashia. Now Marashashia is going to explain to us why that brisa is a problem. Because the whole reason we are machshir in this brisa, the mincha, even though there was a shinui, is because maseh mochichin. Ha'ein maseh mochichin lo. Wait a second. If Mavog uses the term zos Torah sachatos to equate all chatos, and therefore he paskin that chatos sheshchoto l'shum chatos nachshon kshera. So let's look at the pasuk in Mincha, and there too it says zos Torah sa Mincha, and we should darshan according to what's his name? According to Mavog, Torah achas l'chol menachos. So why does the brisa in the name of Reb Shimon have to go through this very convoluted and complicated logic of Maseh Mochichin? Forget about Maseh Mochichin. According to Mavog, you should just derive it from the pasuk Malav that Torah achas l'chol hamenachos, just like Mavog had learned Zos Torah sachatos Torah achas l'chol chatos. Eliyitmar Hachi, we have to reformulate Rav's statement in the name of Avog. Amar Rav Misharshia, Amar Rav Mishmei de Mavog, Chatosh Eshchot Al Menashis Kaper Bo Nachshon. He shechted the carbon chatos with the mindset that it should be valid for what? For Nachshon. Nachshon should achieve the kapara is ein kapara l'mesim. Nachshon is a category, not an individual person, that represents someone who's gone. and there's no kapara for someone who is gone. And therefore, since Nachshon is no longer alive to receive the kapara, he's not subject to the same kapara as the owner of the chatas. And Rava had gone on record back on Daf Zion saying that if you change the bailim of a chatas, then the chatas is psula. So why is this chatas kshera? And here's where we had that whole sugi of Rava with Mino Machriba, Lo Mino Machriba, and basically Rava said that if it's Mino, it's Machriba. So for example, if Shimon is required to bring a chatas for the same reason that Ruvain is, then if the Kohen has in mind Shimon instead of Ruvain, it's possible. But if it was for the sake of a different carbon of Shimon, then it's valid. Now, chatos of Nachshon is not brought for the same purpose of kapara. Nachshon doesn't need kapara. It's all part of the ritual of Chanukas Mishkan. So 1 second, why did you mention Nachshon at all? Why didn't you say Ein Kapara Mesa? You know, it was a person who was Chayiv Chatos, but he died. V'leim Meis Bialma. Hakamash Malon Taima de Meis. The reason why the Chatos is Kshera in this case is because Nachshon is dead. Hadachai Dumya Nachshon Psula. We have other cases of a chatos where there's no need for kapara, and that's dumya denachshel. He says nachshel's chatos was not brought for any violation; it was a gift, and it marked the dedication of the Mishkan. A nazir's chatos and a mitzora's chatos are similar in that they too are not brought for any violation, but simply to remove the status of nazir or to be mitayed mitzorah. So by mentioning Nachshon, Rav teaches incidentally that if a sinner's chatos is offered for the sake of someone obligated to bring a nazir or a mitzora's chatos, it is possible. And we would have said it's similar to Nachshon, and therefore it should be kosher. No, it's not similar to Nachshon because these are live people. The Nazir is alive, the Mitzvah is alive. Gemara rejects it. Hani olos ninu. These chatos that you mentioned are really technically not chatos at all. These are technically olos. And that, if that be the case, then if you had a chatos that was shechted on behalf of a Nazir's chatos or Mitzora's chatos, it actually should be valid. Because if a chatos, we said on Daf Zayin, is slaughtered for the sake of someone obligated to bring an ola, it is valid. And since these chatos are actually like ola offerings, there's no violation. Is if you brought a regular chatos for the sake of someone who's obligated to bring a nazir or a mitzora's chatos, it should not invalidate that korban chatos. Because it's like the case of a chatos that was brought for the purpose of somebody else who's chayiv an olah. Eliyitmar hochi yitmar, Omer Rav Misharshia, Omer Rav Mishmei de Magug, Mavog. I'll never get that name straight. Mavog. Chatos sheshchot al shemechuyev chatos kenachshon kshera chatos nachshon olahi. So if a person slaughtered a chatos for the sake of someone who has to bring a chatos like nachshon, like for example a nazir or a mitzora, is kshera. Chatas nachshon olahi. Now the Gemara is saying is that chatas nachshon is an olah, and now if you brought a chatas for nachshon, it's for an olah, which we said was kosher, and then the same thing would apply in chatas mitzora and chatas noz. Ikedamri. I guess there was another tradition as to what Mavog was saying. Omer Abishashmi Mavog. Chatos sheshchata l'shem chatos nachshon psula. Just the opposite of the tradition that we had. And chatos nachshon is an olahi. So what's the deal now? That if you shechter the chatos l'shem olah, or for the sake of someone who's chayav an olah, then it's psula. I see what he's saying. If he shechted it for the sake of a chatos of nachshon, meaning a chatos that has the similar identity or properties of a chatos nachshon, which means it's an olah, that's shini kodesh. If you shecht a chatos the same olah, it's possible. So the Gemara asks, "Well, lema chatos knows a chatos mitzvah. Why does he have to stretch his arm out to nachshon?" And the answer is ikar chatos nokat. I guess this is the first chatos. Nachshon was the first person to offer any kind of private chatos. Okay, now a chatos was shinui kodesh, Omer Rav, chatos chelev, sheshchot l'shem chatos dam, l'shem chatos avodas kochovim ksher, but l'shem chatos nazir, which we said it has the same propensity as an olah, or l'shem chatos mitzora, is psula. Why? Because hadi olos ninu. Boy Rava, chatos chelev, sheshchot l'shem chatos tumas migdash v'kadosh v'mao. So if a person violates tumas migdash, he brings a korban olav yored, and he has to bring a korban chatos because he's metame something kodesh kodshim, or he's metame the beis hamikdash. Now, a person ate chelev b'shogeg, he's bringing a classic korban chatos, and the avoda, the shchita, was done for the purpose of a chatos of a korban olav yored. So Rava vacillates. Mi amrin and karis kemosa. Should we say that we should compare these two chatos, and we should say that the chatos for tumas migdash is for a violation that bears the ownership of kares, and therefore it's similar to a chatos for eating chelev, which is also chiyuv kares. O dilma ein kavua kemosa. I guess he's saying Ein Kavua Kamosa because it's a carbon oliviorid. And that makes it into Shini Kodesh. So again, both carbonos are chatos, but because one is a regular classic chatos kavua, therefore it's not similar to a chatos of an oliviorid, where he may bring the chatos, maybe he won't bring the chatos, depending on his financial ability. So now Rav Acha is going to answer Rava's question. Rav Acha brei de Rava masni kulhu lepsula. Now, what does it mean, kulhu? I don't get the word kulhu here. He writes here all the above cases. So I'm not sure, but maybe he means even a chatas chelev that was brought for a chatas dam. I don't know. I'm not sure what the word kulu means. My timer. V'shachar osol chatos, l'shem osa chatos. He says it explicitly here. Therefore, even if a chatas for chelev was slaughtered for the sake of a chatas for dam, it is possible. This against Rav. Amalei Rav Ashi. Here we have 5 more minutes. Let's see if we can finish the daf. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Acha Brei de Rava. Baya de Rava Hechi Mas Nisala. Right? Did you have a different version of the vacillation, the suffix of Rava? Because if you're assuming that a chatos chelev or chatos dam is called a shinui kodesh, and therefore each machshava would passel the other one, then for sure, in the case of a korban chatos of an olev yored, in the case of tumas mikdash for kadoshav, it should certainly be psula. I mean, at least in the case of dam and what you call it, and chelev, it's kavua. There's no olav yored. Whereas the chatos in the mikdash, tumas mikdash, is an olav yored. He might not even be chayv the chatos. Malay, so Rav Acha responds, Anan b'shinui bailam asnisalei. I had a different tradition in Rava, in which the question was not about Shini Kodesh, which, as you say, with a Kal Vachomer, it should be possible in the case of a Shini for a Chatas that's Olav Yored, but rather, we're talking about Shinui Bailim. Omar Rava, Chatas Chelev, Shesh Chatal, Misha B'chuyiv Chatas Dam, V'Chatas Avodas Kochavim, Psula. And why? Because it's a Shinui Bailim in Chatas, which passes the Chatas. Al Misha B'chuyiv Chatas Nazir, V'Chatas Mitzora. So now it's a chatos that you brought for the sake of somebody else's ola, shera. Ubaya lahachi. And now we're ready to formulate the suffix of Rav. Boy Rav. Chatos chayv sheshchot al misha b'chuyiv chatos the tumas migdash kadosh of mahu. Me, I'm reading Kares Kamosa, right? Going into the Mikdash Tameh is also a Chiv Kares, like eating Chelev. O Dilma Ein Kavua Kamosa. But this Chatos is not fixed. It's not kavua. It depends upon his financial status. It's olaviore. Take when the Gemara comes to no answer. Itmar shchata lishma lizok dama shelo lishma. He had in mind when he did the shchita that he's going to do the zrika shelo lishma. The shchita he did lishma, but for some strange reason, don't ask me why psychologically, he was motivated to do the zrika shelo lishma. But this comes on the machash me'avoda la'avoda, meaning his incorrect machshava was, how should I say, implemented, I'm looking for a better word, while he was doing one avoda, which that avoda he did lishma, for the sake of another avoda. So if he would have done the zrika and had in mind machsheves shelo lishma of shinui kodesh, it would have passed the karma. In a case of a chatos. I'm just not sure we're talking about a chatos here. Just 1 second. So anyway, Rav Yochanan Omer Psula. I guess we're talking about a chatos. Meaning machashvim avoda lavoda. We're going to take his machshava of shinui, shinui kodesh. I'm going to assume that he had at the time of the shechita and apply it to the time of avodas hadam, as if at the time of avodas hazrika he had in mind shelo lishma. Ishlakish Omer kshera. Rav Yochanan Omer Psula machashvim avoda lavoda. Okay, how do we derive that? Yalfini machsheves pigul. Let's leave that out for a minute. Reish Lakish Omar kshera ein machashvim avoda lavoda v'lo yalfinon mi machsheves pigul. This is going to be an old machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon. So what is this business about machsheves pigul? So if you know a little bit about pigul, right? Pigul is chutz zmano, which means that the Kohen during one of the avodos had in mind that the korban could be eaten chutz zmano. So let's say the zrika was for a korban that could be eaten only on that day. The Kohen does the shechita with the intention of zrikas hadam tomorrow. That's called pigul. Now, the avodah of shechita was performed with the machshava of pigul, meaning that the avodah of zrika would be done tomorrow. So that itself is machashmi avodah lavoda, and it's possible. Why doesn't Reish Lakish accept this? The shelo lishma intent invalidates the chatas only if it concerns the avodah perfectly done. And according to Reish Lakish, the law for shelo lishma cannot be derived from the law of pigul, because pigul does not result from the fact that Kohen slaughtered the animal with the intention to perform another service improperly. Rather, the offering becomes pigul when he slaughters it with the intention that it will be consumed, which means either achilus odom or achilus mizbeach, beyond the allotted time. So we're talking about eating the korban. That's not an avodah. So actions that are not necessarily avodos, like haktor al gabi mizbeach, intention to perform the zrika beyond the allotted time renders the offering pigul only because the blood is considered one of the portions consumed by the altar, but not because of the zrika sadam. Let's just give it one more minute. So Reish Lakish is making a fundamental distinction between two concepts. One is Achilas Mizbech, and the other is Avodas HaKorban. Now, if you want to set up a psul of Machsheve Shalol Lishma, says Reish Lakish, it's got to be a psul of Avoda. But the case of Pigel is not a psul Avoda. So his machshava that the zrika should be chutz lizmano, which creates pigul, is because of the zrika b'toras nechal. It's consumed by the mizbeach, not b'toras avoda, because that machshava b'toras avoda would not possible because lo machshavina mi avoda lavoda, he had the machshava at the time of the shechita. So the halachas of Shalol Lishma and Shini Karban and Shini Kodesh, they apply only to a machshava haposeles during any of the four avodas. But you don't jump from one avoda to the avoda, as opposed to the case of Pigul, where even though you're going from Shchita to Zrika, but you're not going to Zrika b'toras avoda, but rather Zrika b'toras nechal, that it should be consumed on the Mizbeach. And he had in mind, this Kohen, that when he did the Shechita, the Zrika, meaning the consuming the dam on the Mizbeach, should be Chutz Lizmano, but not B'toras Avod. That's the Shita of Reish Lakish. And also the Kamayu, the Itmar, and then on Daf Yud, the Gemara is going to show that there's an old machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about this very point of machashvin lavoda or lo machashvin lavoda, which is in the case of shochris peim almanas lizok dom lavodas kol chov. Okay, then. So let me wish you a good Gemench Diyar. Thank you very much. And we're up to Daf Yud. I don't know what we're going to do on Tzom Gedalia. We'll be in touch. Okay. Shana Tova.